What is the Rebel Alliance's greatest ship? The X-Wing? The Mon Calamari cruiser? No, it's the GR-75 transport. I'm obviously joking, and Star Wars fans have often wondered, why did the Rebel Alliance bother taking the GR-75 transports into battle? That's the question we'll be tackling on today's episode of Star Wars Lore. This is a question that I had long wondered, and before making this video I had no clear answer. As I always do when I have questions about spaceships, I asked my good friend Space Doc. Obviously he didn't have the answers. Then I remember he did a Rogue One commentary. Maybe somebody who was on that podcast with him had an idea.
Again, the rebels have brought a whole load of unarmed GR-75 transports into a giant battle.
What did they do? Is it in case the rebels get hungry and just stack, and that's just like where they all are?
So it's not just me, everyone appears to be clueless. Either this question has never been answered before, or it's only been answered in an obscure location. I decided to crack out my Star Wars Expanded Universe books and see if I could find anything in there. The Star Wars Encyclopedia doesn't even have an entry for the ship. Similarly, the ships aren't mentioned in either the Return of the Jedi novelization or the script. The new Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels only adds to the confusion, saying that the ships are rarely armed and usually have to be accompanied by escort craft. So I figured, let's just talk about the ships logically, look at how they're treated, and what possible purposes they may serve. I'm going to go over all possible options and then give the one that I think is most likely. One of the reasons I've heard for the inclusion of GR-75s in battle is that they're refueling ships and that the Rebel Alliance needs these ships to refuel during and after major battles. I guess that does make some sense, but it seems to be inconsistent with how Star Wars Legends and Star Wars Canon have treated fuel in the Star Wars universe. I think starship fuel lasts a while, at least for longer than a battle and 2 hyperspace jumps. If it was the case that the GR-75s did need to be refueled, then they could simply wait somewhere outside the battle and refuel the ships afterwards. I pretty much outright dismiss this idea, as I do the notion that the Alliance only brings the GR-75s with them to Endor and other battles because they've got literally nowhere else to put them. The Star Wars galaxy is huge, and battles last hours, possibly days, but very seldomly longer than that. Even if you can't spare a couple of X-Wings or a small ship to guard the GR-75s, you could easily jump them somewhere and just have them sit for the duration of the battle. So those are 2 options that I'm going to outright dismiss, but what theories and what rationale are actually believable? Before we do consider these rationale, I think it would be useful to look at the GR-75 as a ship and how they're usually positioned within a fleet. GR-75s were heavily modular. That basically means that you could change it to suit your needs. However, even with that adaptability, they were still primarily transport ships. However, they could be modified to transport weapons, transport people, whatever. Even the most heavily modified GR-75 would not have been any sort of warship. Didn't have the capacity, both on an energy level and on a logistics level, to mount more than a few light weapons. From what I understand, for a GR-75 to be well armed and maxed out, it would have had 4 light laser cannons. The ship was also quite sluggish, it wasn't very agile, and just generally it was slow. However, they did have a decently thick hull and dedicated shielding. Based on the vulnerability and really lack of utility of these craft, at least when looking at them plainly, you'd think that they would be in the middle of the fleet. However, in both Rogue One and Return of the Jedi, this isn't the case. In Rogue One especially, we see that the GR-75s stick around the larger capital ships. With all that being said, what are the possible roles of the GR-75? What rationale makes sense for the Rebel Alliance's inclusion of them within their fleets? The first option is they're used as kamikaze ships, perhaps filled up with fuel and driven at enemy ships, or used as fire ships. We've seen this once in Rogue Squadron 3 when a GR-75 crashes into an Imperial ship, but given that GR-75s usually stick relatively close to Rebel ships, and we've never actually seen them ram anything other than in that one instance, this doesn't seem like a likely rationale. Another, more probable scenario is that the ships are used as target saturation, basically to increase the the size of the Rebel fleet to help either draw fire away or protect larger ships. I think this actually makes some sense. Going back to Rogue One, we can see that the Profundity Mon Calamari cruiser typically has several GR-75s surrounding it. We know, at least in Star Wars Legends, that the Rebel Alliance received a good deal of these ships after the company that manufactured them, Gallifrey, went bankrupt. Obviously, logistically, these ships would have been used during peacetime, but the Rebel Alliance was really scant for resources, especially when combating the much larger, infinitely more well-funded Empire. It makes sense that if they have ships, they're gonna find some use for them. However, that doesn't necessarily point to them being in a target saturation role. I'll get to that more in just a second. One other thing that leads me to believe that they may somehow work in target saturation is just the sheer amount of them that you can see in battle. Particularly in the ending scenes of the Battle of Endor, especially on the special editions, you can see that the Alliance had a load of these ships. This is also true for the Battle of Scarif. Despite the fact that we don't really see any of these ships do anything, there are a lot of them. It does seem fairly callous for the Rebel Alliance to waste lives and to make personnel man these ships, but it's very possible that they were somehow slave-rigged or on a beacon call, which would mean that they would be mostly automated. Given that these were very slow transport ships, which we know were quite easy to modify, that does seem possible. Additionally, aside from target saturation, we also have the other possibility that they were used in an anti-starfighter capacity. This is a related role to the previous one, also based on the fact that the Alliance had a bunch of these ships and they had to do something with them. The ideal anti-starfighter ship is basically everything that the GR-75 is not. It's nimble, it's well armed, it's able to track starfighters, and has many anti-starfighter weapons. The GR-75 is slow, it's not meant for combat, and it has only a few laser cannons. Still, some sort of starfighter defense is better than nothing. And in desperate situations, although you are risking lives, it does make sense that the GR-75s would nonetheless participate in battle. I think that those are really the main two options. Either the ship is used as target saturation, or it's used in an anti-starfighter capacity. In order to try to determine which, I watched both the Battle of Endor and the Space Battle of Scarif at 0.25 speed to try to see if the GR-75s actually did anything, whether they shot any starfighters, whether they moved in any sort of meaningful way, and really nothing. At one point during the Battle of Scarif, I thought I saw lasers coming from the ship, but it turned out to be a much more useful CR-90. Admittedly, usually when you see shots being fired, they're turbo lasers, and laser cannons are much smaller, but just the fact that we never see any of the ships do anything besides kind of leech around the bigger ships leads me to believe that they're more likely used as target saturation. It would have been fairly expensive to upgrade these ships with lasers, especially when in their stock form. They have no weapons, and military hardware is fairly difficult to come across. Where these ships are fairly big targets and the Rebel Alliance was strapped for resources, I think that they most likely just threw them in the battle so the Empire had something else to shoot at, and so that their larger capital ships were somewhat protected. But that's just my opinion. Do you think these ships were used as target saturation, as anti-starfighter capital ships, or perhaps something else? Maybe refueling ships, to transport very important persons, maybe even to transport starfighters, although they don't have any visible hangar. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video about what I think is probably the greatest ship in Star Wars. I'm obviously joking, but the GR-75 is nonetheless interesting, and I quite like its design. It adds some nice bulk to the Rebel fleet during most space battles. Anyways, thanks again, guys. This has been EckhartsLadder. May the Force be with you.